Okay, welcome everyone to lesson 32. This is about error detecting codes. It's a little bit different from what we've been talking about before, which is where you're trying to exchange information with someone and someone else might intercept that information and you don't want them to have it. In this case, we're thinking about you're trying to send information to someone and that information might get garbled or misread, and you want your recipient to be able to tell that it's incorrect. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to revisit The Princess and the Rats for another helpful riddle.
So here we are in the kingdom of the Princess and the Rats. As you might expect, the near poisoning at the wedding really caused tensions between the princess's kingdom and the neighboring one to escalate. Eventually, the kingdoms went to war over it. Here is some drone footage of the war. As you can see, things are pretty awful. Even the horses got involved. Sadly for the princess, she and her brave band of knights were captured in battle. Now, the king of the neighboring kingdom is a very stable genius. Just kidding, he's a madman. And he presents the princess and her knights with a sadistic game. He has several black and white hats. He will blindfold the princess and the knights and line them up and place either a black or white hat on their heads. He will then remove the blindfolds. Any knight who can guess the color of his hat can go free. Any knight who guesses the wrong one will be executed. The princess and the knights can strategize over the course of the afternoon and evening. The game will be played at dawn. So, one knight suggests that everyone should just guess white, and then half of them will probably survive. But at this point, the knights notice that the king is listening. So if he heard their strategy, he will give them all black hats, and then they will all die. So another knight suggests that the knight at the back should shout out the color of the knight in front of him, of the hat of the knight in front of him, and every other knight should do the same. Then half of the knights will survive no matter what. But the princess says, "I know how to guess our hat colors, and almost all of us will go free." How does she do it? Here is the strategy, and it's based on something called parity. The knight in the very back has 11 knights in front of him. So either there must be an even number of white hats or an even number of black hats, but not both. In this example, there are an even number of white hats. There are 6. So he calls out whichever color hat is odd, in this case black. The knight directly in front of him also sees an odd number of black hats. If her hat was black and she saw an odd number, then the knight behind her would have seen an even number, but he didn't. So she knows that her hat is white. So do the next 2 knights. But the 5th knight from the back sees an even number of black hats, and so he knows his hat must be black, because the first knight saw an odd number and everyone else has had white hats. So everyone gets to go home safely guaranteed, except for the last knight in line who has only a 50% chance of calling out the right color. In this particular case, he lives, but I made it that way on purpose so you wouldn't be sad.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that little interlude. So let's first talk about why we need error correcting codes. Long strings of numbers are necessary for security, as we've seen, but they're vulnerable to being misread. The most common errors are either flipping a bit, so if we're talking about strings of 1s and 0s, mistaking a 1 for a 0, or vice versa, or transposing 2 numbers. So for example, if you are looking at the number 641, but you read it as 614. So in our riddle, the last knight in line who calls out white or black, depending on what kind of hat he sees, he functions as a sort of a check digit. So let me show you what I mean by that. So in this case, we have 7 hats. 4 of them are black and 3 of them are white. We can interpret that as a row of 1s and 0s. In this case, there's an even number of black hats and an odd number of white hats. So in our riddle, our knight would have called out white. Well, as it happens, if we interpret white as a 0, 0 is the XOR operation done on all of the preceding digits. So if our knight functions as a check digit, it is the sum, the XOR sum of all the digits that preceded it. In this case, there's an odd number of black hats, so in our riddle, the knight would have called out black. If black is interpreted as a 1 and white is interpreted as a 0, then a 1, or a black hat, would be a check digit. It's the XOR sum of all the digits that preceded it. So what do we do when numbers are more complicated than that? 3 examples of this, where we're using all the digits instead of just 1s and 0s, are ISBN numbers, UPC codes, and of course credit card numbers. So let's start with ISBN numbers. That stands for International Standard Book Number. Here on the screen is the ISBN number of one of my favorite books. And I'm going to conceal the last digit for a moment, and then I'll show you how that digit is calculated. So first, all the digits are multiplied either by 1 or by 3. The first digit is multiplied by a 1, the second by 3, the third by 1, etc., all the way down the line. You can see how the sum that you would get would be different if you had accidentally transposed 2 numbers. So then we add those numbers up, and we get 115. We then mod by 10 and subtract the result from 10. This is the same as asking, what number would I need to add to 115 in order to make it 0 in mod 10? And that number is 5. Another case of a check digit are UPC codes. UPC codes are commonly misread. If you've ever been to the grocery store and you've checked out a bunch of things and the scanner sort of beeps at you, that means that the check digit didn't check out. So the scanner misread the item and you have to scan it again. So in this case, this is the UPC number we're looking at. And you can see that I've left the check digit off on the screen, but in the corner you can see that it's going to be a 3. So let's see how that's calculated. Just to make things confusing, this time the first number is multiplied by 3, and the second by 1, and the third by 3, and the fourth by 1, etc. I'm not exactly sure why this is reversed from an ISBN number, but that's the way it is. Again, it's added up. In this case, we get 147. We mod by 10 and get 7. And 10 minus 7 is 3. So our check digit is a 3. And finally, credit cards. Credit card check digits are computed using something called the Lun algorithm. Incidentally, the code that you have to punch in, either a 4-digit or a 3-digit code on the back of the card usually, is also calculated with an algorithm, but that algorithm is secret. So here's a credit card number. It's definitely not mine. It wouldn't matter if it was, since you don't have my expiration date, or maybe my zip code, or my CVC number, so I don't think you can use it anyway. So in this case, the first number is multiplied by 2, and the second by 1, and the third by 2, and the fourth by 1, and the fifth by 2, etc., all the way down the line. And the only difference here, which is kind of interesting, is that when the result is a 2-digit number, those digits are added together to create a one-digit number. And then we can see here that the result is 62. Again, we're going to mod by 10 and get 2. And 10 minus 2 is 8. And as you can see, 8 is the correct check digit on the credit card number, which is definitely not mine. Interestingly enough, Social Security numbers also use a check digit, but how it is generated is secret information. And that's all I have for you. I hope you've enjoyed this lesson on error detecting codes, and I hope you take this opportunity to look around your home for some books or some objects which still might have their UPC codes on them, and impress your friends and family by showing them how the check digit is generated.